worry about me. Lego Speedrun Millennium Falcon. I'm Kev.
I'm Joe.
On this episode, we're talking about pitfalls and other kinds of design traps that you kind of want to avoid when you're designing narrative or just game design.
Yeah, I think a lot of these are traps for new DMs, but I've definitely been guilty of some of these all throughout my Dungeons and Dragons DMing career.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff to be aware of when you're kind of going through like designing encounters, combat encounters, social encounters, or you're thinking about narrative and just your overall game design principles, and kind of having rules that, or a collection of things that you try to avoid can definitely help you be more consistent and just have a lot more fun with your sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And you aren't going to be worrying about whether or not your players are having as much fun as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think I've been blessed in some degree that because I like to experiment as a dungeon master, and I've had a very patient and like encouraging group of players that like put up with my bullshit, but also kind of enjoy it a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
and the other half of that is they let me know if something's not working too,
Mm-hmm.
which is just important.
Yeah, so we also want to be clear that we're talking much more specifically about game design than we are behavioral problems. Because, I mean, a lot of these can be attributed to behavioral problems, but it's not necessarily. We're talking about the symptoms, not the end game diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So
Let's dive in here. What's our first one?
player agency, and taking player agency away. And this conversation really started when you and I were sitting down having a conversation about a new enemy type in Destiny 2, kind of talking about how you were saying how it took you a while to realize that taking player abilities away and character options away isn't a thing that feels good, and it isn't a good design feature.
Yeah, there's something that I realized in the context of D&D a while ago, because it's something that I was specifically guilty of. I actually have a couple instances I could talk about. It just feels just right off the bat, it feels like an interesting option because it's a tempting option because it doesn't require you to create anything. It just means you take it away.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like an easy option to slot into an encounter, but the end result is usually less fun.
Yeah, to me it sounds super tempting too, because it's like, this is less stuff I need to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
I have more control over the situation itself, and I can be more confident in the kind of experience that I'm giving my players. But at the end of the day, all it kind of feels like is a part of the player that was so important and ingrained is just gone, and you're kind of undermining the creative flow of the player in a lot of ways. Like if I make a player who's like a sorcerer, and their whole deal is like manipulating a certain spell with meta magic, if I just take away their meta magic abilities, that doesn't feel good, because now this core component of my ability is just gone. Like a very core aspect of my character no longer has meaning. And we were talking about this in the context of Destiny 2, how they introduce a new enemy called the Tormentor, who takes away a grenade ability.
All of your charges.
Oh, all of them.
Super, melee, grenade, and whatever you call that class-specific one.
Like the utility ability or whatever. Yeah.
And introducing that alongside a new subclass. So while you're trying to enjoy this new feature, they just come in and go, nope.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of remember, something that I ran recently was the Sacking of Sugardale, a module that I made that you played through. And at the get-go, I took away the ability to cast Speak with Dead and Commune with Plants. But I was thinking, how does that kind of factor into this discussion about taking away player abilities?
Well, I was thinking about providing a similar example. I think that's fine.
For context here, it was a mystery where a village was sacked, burned, and the players needed to figure out who caused this, why. And I didn't want them to just immediately solve the answer by throwing down a spell to just ask, hey, who killed you? I wanted them to have more ability to role play. And I wasn't going to take away, just outright ban that spell going forward. But I wanted to put a measure on it before anything.
Right. And I think what I was going to say is, we talk about a lot the kind of need to remove spells like Revivify, or maybe not Revivify, but like resurrection spells in general, because they really hold back the tension of a campaign. And I think that is the same, if not in the same vein as what we're talking about, but it's kind of an exception that proves the rule, right? If it helps your, and this would be a subject on another subject we've been tossing around, mechanics as a function of genre. I think as long as that mechanical formula is done right, these changes are fine. But like when you're when you said, actually I'll throw another example. Grave Domain Clerics in Xanathar's Guide in 5e are my least favorite subclass, because they're what's their cleric ability that it's like, I forget what it's called, but channel divinity, right? Their channel divinity is when an enemy scores a critical hit within a certain radius of the cleric, they can just neutralize the crit. It still hits, but it's not a critical hit. And I think that's bad game design, because suddenly you're just not letting the DM crit. I don't think that's any fun.
That doesn't really play into any sort of rule. That just makes the world less dangerous and combat less spiky.
Down drama and anticipation.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, what are you doing? You're avoiding something that is a 5% chance.
Yeah, it's
like, first of all, this is an ability that's only good 5% of the time. So why is it an ability? Second, doesn't really feel like that good, I guess, when it comes to just taking away abilities.
Yeah, and I think it's only kind of good. It's moderately flavorful for what the class is trying to be, but ultimately it just takes away a part of the game, and it can really let the air out of a DM's tires when they're like, oh yeah, I finally crit, and then no crit.
I would almost feel better if you could transfer the damage onto someone else. That would technically be an even stronger ability, because with the whole Grave Domain Cleric thing, it's like you are manipulating the powers of life and death. So I would almost be more tempted to say you can eliminate a crit but that crit then needs to be placed on someone else or something else at some point in time.
I think it's also kind of highlights the importance of the tactical use of anti-magic fields. 'Cause that's another example of like when applied correctly can be very interesting.
Yeah.
But if not, is just really annoying for your casters.
Yeah, I guess taking away abilities, it kind of needs to be strategic. It's like you want to impose interesting limitations on your players without being annoying. That I think that's the goal.
Yeah, we've like talked about like letting a player shine, and you should do that by enabling what they do naturally, not holding everybody else in the party back and forcing them into the spotlight.
I think another great example of kind of limitations, one would be dark vision, and two would be
Oh, don't get me started on dark vision.
let's go into dark vision in a sec, but also like Goodberry, right? So a lot of people ban Goodberry because they want to have that feel for a really kind of gritty wildlife survival experience. They don't really get that with those spells in existence, right? You don't have the fear of delving into the dark, and you don't really need to make the conscious decision of is it a good thing? Is it worth lighting a torch right now, or should I hold off? That's just kind of a decision that doesn't really need to be made in 5th edition. And then with Goodberry, really, the game's about killing monsters. The game is not about wilderness survival. And like when you really kind of think about like this game is purely to kill monsters, when you look at how resilient the players are and how many tools they have at their disposal to just ignore mundane hazards like crossing a river or getting sick or finding a safe place to rest and like being healed and stuff, like eliminating negative effects. There's really a lot of tools and a lot of things that are out there to just kind of circumvent those situations.
The next one we have is railroading, which is another subject that's going to be kind of like case by case, and it's like railroading is probably held up as like the biggest and most infamous DM blunder.
I definitely think it's
and most cardinal of sins.
Yeah.
But it's still my group. They look for the train tracks a lot of the time. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if that's what your players want.
Yeah, I think when people say railroading, I think what they really mean is their decisions don't matter. Like their decisions ultimately don't have an effect on the outcome. I mean, everybody loves a roller coaster, right? I know that when I get into a campaign and it's just an absolute sandbox, like it's like, yeah, sure, there's all this sand, but there's no like structure. I don't have a bucket to build a castle. You know what I mean? I need to go make the bucket to really fill out the world. Like sure, there's like certain elements of world building and whatever, but having that kind of having narrative structure, having like there being factions and people in the world that have their own motives and motivations. And maybe I'm conflating just having a narrative with railroad tracks.
I do think that the term is kind of like overblown. Like with Horde of the Dragon Queen, right? It takes place on the Sword Coast, right? Can you go? What's the capital of the Sword Coast? There's
no real capital. It's a collection of city-states.
Waterdeep.
Yeah.
Not on the Sword Coast?
Yes, Waterdeep's on the Sword Coast.
There's no map of Waterdeep in the Horde of the Dragon Queen.
No.
You can't go to Waterdeep if you wanted to, even though you're like, a couple days travel.
Yeah, technically within the rules of strictly following Horde of the Dragon Queen.
But
yeah.
like when we say that D&D is a game about killing monsters, and we know that because there's an entire book dedicated to
Essentially 3 books
essentially
dedicated.
3 books now dedicated to listing out monsters. When you see that there's no water deep in your book, a new DM might like freak out when his lore deep players try to go to water deep in the laid out module. So what I was trying to say is that even modules to some degree lay out trail tracks. It's once you write a story that will come to fruition, come hell or high water, no matter what the players say, that we really get the railroading that people kind of demonize.
Yeah, I think it's the campaign is on train tracks that have a set destination, that will like arrive at that destination. There's no sort of like, there's no stopping at other stations to kind of have diversions. There's no kind of like meandering paths to like come to and fro from the tracks. So I think like, just being aware of what the players want and not being so strictly adherent to the lore or to the narrative is like what's best for that.
I think someone on the internet once said, I forget who it was, but they said lay out a DM should prepare a scenario, not a story.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty key to avoiding that kind of railroading.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in the kind of railroad that I lay out for my party that kind of likes the structure and having more or less a clear path ahead of them, dice rolls and all these things and all their actions can still dictate where I lay the next tracks. Mm-hmm. I don't have the next several miles, the next station, the next stops on these train tracks laid out like 10 sessions in advance, right?
Yeah. And another thing for I feel that it's kind of related to railroading is the notion of the DM NPC, because I really feel that those two kind of things go hand in hand, right? Mm-hmm. There's the railroading, the destination is predetermined, and then the reason that people hate the DM NPC is because the DM NPC kind of takes away from the narrative of the players and forces the narrative to continue into one direction. But at the same time, like, if you have, like, how are you supposed to have a story without NPCs? Especially, how are you supposed to have a story without helpful NPCs?
So I think, this is going to be another case of let's cast away some of the illusions about these cardinal sins. Like the closest thing I've ever had to having a DMPC, I had them. It was basically it was my player character in the campaign, but he was getting kidnapped all the time. He was sending them out on missions that he wouldn't follow them on, and so he was a character of authority within the story, but he was never trying to take his own cool moments, and I think that's where the DMPC becomes a problem.
Yeah, I'll give 2 examples. One is kind of an inverse, where my DM NPC was in some ways kind of intentionally meant to outshine the players a little bit. I talked about it before, about Greenest, about how players were coming up to Greenest to protect it from the oncoming dragon horde in Rise of the Dragon Queen, or whichever one it was. And they had this big old badass that was there protecting the town, this big like paladin. And I really built him up as like this in kind of near invincible kind of character, who was like pretty larger than life. And he wasn't like taking away from the moments of the players. He was literally just holding the line and anything. He was basically just a meat grinder that wasn't being pushed back. So in a lot of ways, he was just a stabilizing force to hold the line for the players so that they could do their weird zany stuff of like ducking for cover and like shooting out. And he would basically, if they would get into heavy or they would get surrounded, he would come over and like bail them out. So he wasn't like, he definitely was in a lot of ways like a star of the show, but he wasn't taking away from the individual moments in the combat. And then when they eventually did fall back to the keep, there was the Dragonborn that challenged him. He took the challenge and he was just murked. And so this NPC who was really kind of instrumental in their survival and gave them a sense of security and like kind of like this good feeling, was like taken away from them kind of unfairly in a way.
See, I think that's fine, because even if he's taking his own cool moments, like you said, the players are still having theirs. But in the back of your head, the number one distinguishing factor is that you know that this guy is not the main character. And, you know, you had a plan for him and everything. And, I think that's really it. As long like you recognize that he's not the main character, and that these players still have to have their moments. I remember, I also have two examples. Did you say you have a second one?
I do, yeah. And then other times when I feel like when I send NPCs in with players to go raid a dungeon, I feel like those NPCs fall into one of two archetypes. A sage who, if they get stuck, the players get stuck, or they don't understand the like what's going on, they can be like, hey, can you transcribe these runes that we don't understand? Or hey, do you know a little bit of information about this dungeon? And he just kind of hangs back. So like a sage or a henchman, and like, hey, we don't want to touch this, go touch it, bozo, so it's like I feel like those are the two kinds of things I send them in with.
There's a Colvo video that's kind of like that, where he kind of gives advice on like the temperament of a DMPC or a follower. I think this is specifically for single player D&D, whereas there's a DM and a single player where you probably want to give them like an NPC as backup. And the example he gave was a dwarf who would always opt to fight. And so, the players would be like, oh man, do you think we should fight this dragon? And the dwarf NPC would be like, hell yeah, we should fight this dragon. And the players would be like, oh, well, the DM thinks that we should fight the dragon. Maybe we should fight the dragon. And then, so they go, so dwarf NPC, why should we fight the dragon? Because either we'll kill him or we'll die gloriously. And he's like, oh, nope, we're not fighting the dragon. This dwarf is taking the Slayer oath.
He's got a couple screws loose.
Right. So like it's like the temperament like that like really makes a good DM NPC, if you can even consider that at that point.
I wonder if there's like a level of simplicity that you should kind of like shoot for in a way when you're talking about these kinds of things, right? It's like they're like the player motivations, the character motivations of the NPCs could be complex, but I feel like having them kind of be simple and be straightforward so that the player can easily remember, like, oh yeah, that guy, this is what he wants. He's just here because he wants treasure. He's here because they want to find their dad, whatever. So that might also be a helpful thing. The
other one he said was a cowardly character. It's like if you listen to the NPC and his advice, you're never going to get anything done. But for what other reasons this NPC would have to follow you along, probably for their own safety or something like that. I've had a couple examples like this as a player. There was one time where we were losing a combat, and the DM's level 20 monk shows up. We were like level 4 or 5. This level 20 monk shows up and kicks the crap out of all these NPCs, all these rogues that were fighting us. And then once the combat was over, he didn't have anything for us. You know, there was no. It was like, so I don't know if that was the plan for the encounter. I don't know if the combat just went south and he didn't want us to die, but that one didn't work out so great. And the other one was from a dwarf party where all the players, the DM had us all make separate characters, and we all brought a dwarf to the table, like individually.
That's awesome.
So we called it dwarf party, but we made it about 2 sessions in, and the DM introduces our new follower, the elf wizard.
Oh, jeez.
And so we ditched him so fast. We had to bring him through a water temple first, and he was like sputtering and kicking behind us as we just like did nothing to help him come along, because we didn't want him with us. It'd be even funnier
if you just like hog-tied him and like dragged him behind you. It's like a barrel, like, or like close. A tire. Yeah, that's funny. That's good. I like that. That's really funny. So what do you think about, and I'm looking at our list, and I think arbitrary fail states and player beatdown kind of go hand in hand, and I think I have an example that kind of shows how frustrating that is. This was truly the very first game I ever played in. It was Pathfinder First Edition in high school, and don't remember anything about the character I was playing. Completely irrelevant. I never made an attack, never cast a spell.
Uh-oh.
So we're in this game, and we're basically just going through this dungeon. One of us steps into a room, like pokes their head in, like through a threshold, and comes back. It's like, that room is just filled with treasure. It's just filled to the brim with treasure. So that all of us are like, that has to be a trap. You know, there's no way it's that easy. We haven't encountered anything, blah, blah, blah. One player goes in, door falls behind him, comes back out, walks up, and he's like, yeah, there's a bunch of treasure over there. And we're like debating like how to get it out of there. And then all of a sudden, his body just starts morphing into like this mechanical flesh horror that kind of looks like some kind of demon engine, injects another, and like the syringe comes out of him, injects another player, kills him instantly. And then that like monster just starts killing everybody.
Which victim were you?
I think I ran away, or we stopped playing because everybody was like, why are we playing this? Like, you're literally, because okay, so you know how never do damage during a cutscene? He wasn't letting us roll. He was just describing how he was killing us.
Okay, is this a module, or is this
no, like this was his homebrew?
Was this his first session?
I have no idea.
Wow, that is pretty bad.
So apparently what happened was the guy went into the room, door closed behind him, and he was mutated. No save, it just happened. He comes back, and he is turned into like this giant Generator Rex looking monster with just like these hands that look like Von Cleese or whatever the main villain is. And he's like this like 6-legged monster, and just starts tearing us all apart. And so like arbitrary fail state of like, yeah, there's treasure, go in there, you die, but there's nothing to really do, or like kind of
hint that it was a trap,
but we hadn't encountered any resistance before. It's like, it smells fishy, but like, how are we supposed to? And also, mind you, we were like level 1. So it's like, how are we supposed to know that there was some sort of like eldritch abomination in this thing, and then we don't get to do anything about it, you know? Right. So arbitrary fail state of going into the room, and then just this player beatdown of, we aren't even rolling to see what to fight back, or, you know, it's not even like we're running. Like, it would be, you know, you could totally turn that into like a really fun encounter of like, yeah, there's a monster. Now it's a chase scene. You need to go away. Somebody who you thought was your friend is now a monster. You don't really know what's up. And then you can meet up with that player that you just killed like further down. It's like, yeah, I got separated. I don't know what happened.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's the kind of campaign that you have to, uh, you know, set up the expectation going in, and then it has to be save or die, not just die.
Yeah, I so when it comes to like the save or die mechanics, I feel that that can only be done when you have a group that is not new, because for a lot of us this was the first time we were playing D&D, and we were also playing it at a very low level of power, first level. And so it needs to be stated incredibly upfront, being like, hey, you do this, death is like around the corner. And you know, you can do this with description of being like, yeah, your hand moves towards the blade, like there's like a dagger on an altar, moves towards the Obsidian blade, and before you even touch it,
You got a bad feeling about this.
just this overwhelming aura of death and malice comes over you, and you have no desire to continue your present course of action.
I guess that's that. Yeah, I'm the kind of guy who wants to press the big red button. So if you described an item, I mean, if you say your character has no desire to continue the interaction, like sure, I'll take the hint. But if you just say you have an incredible sense of death and malice, I'm probably still gonna push that button.
So that's why I say like it needs to be explicitly clear. So for example, in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, there's this one item. You go into a room and there's this statue holding a stone box, and there's a pool of acid suspended in the air above it. And so you grab the box, the acid falls, whatever, you live. Inside the box is a petrified heart. The description of the petrified heart is, if any of the players attune with this item, they instantly die. That is that is word for word the description of this item.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, so none of them. So I gave them a description very similar to the one that I just gave you. And, you know, further down the line, there's like this tiefling or something that's like chained up against the wall. And if you put the heart into the thing, it like frees his soul or something. And a player asked me like, what would happen if I do that? It would just straight kill you. And they started laughing out loud. They're like, I'm so happy that I didn't do that. And it's like, I think being up front, like after being like, yeah, that was instant death. That's awesome. You avoided it for whatever reason. But I think being like incredibly upfront about it is important. And, you know, player beatdown just doesn't feel good unless you have the kind of player that is super masochistic. And like love, like, you know, I love, you know, being hogtied and dragged behind a horse personally, because I just think that that's like such a funny introduction. Like you just find this guy who's been like flayed, and just reeling, and he's just a loser. He was just like, you know, beat to hell. I really like that because it kind of like puts into the notion of my own kind of mortality into the game, and I kind of like that. But the reason that I like that is because I survived it, and I'm able to like overcome those scenarios later. You know, not because like I just want my teeth like stomped into a curb, you know, just constantly, which, you know, can be fun, but it all comes down to like the balance of like victory and failure. And I think it's like better to face more victory in tabletop games than it is failure.
Yeah, I don't think I have a lot of personal experience with player beatdowns aside from that monk example. That one didn't feel good. There is a player in one of my campaigns who was a Dragonborn paladin, and it kind of became a running joke because he was the only frontline player that I was like focusing him. So for one session, I actually did try to kill him, and you know, I shouldn't have. That wasn't, uh, that wasn't fair. That wasn't cool of me. But to my credit, I failed. This guy I was like, because he was so strong. I was like, holy crap, paladins just can't be hit. So I was like, if I really try, can I even do it with these encounters I have planned out? It's like, no, not really.
Well, I also think that that's a valuable experiment.
Yeah.
I think that it's to put your player in a scenario that feels unbeatable, I think is a very good thing, because it really puts into perspective what their capabilities are, and also like how creative the players are, right? I just had an example and then it left my brain. Oh well.
It happens to me often.
Low rewards and slow progression. And that's our next bullet item under the taking away or undermining player agency. And what that is, I feel, is not providing sufficient reward for incredible effort. So, for example, we had this one scenario where we were going away into the Great White North to find the ruins of something to basically predict the oncoming apocalypse. It was a rumor. We don't really know what was going on, like if it was ultimately like something, right? And we spent like 3 months of in-game time trying to get to this destination, like so super far into like the Great White North. We descend into like this submerged temple, like hundreds of feet below the permafrost. And when we get down there, we realize that there's nothing. It was a total red herring, total waste of our time. And in a lot of ways, it just kind of felt like this is a dead end, that we just wasted our time. And I have mixed feelings about it. In some ways, I think it's cool, because I think it was the first time I really encountered a rumor that turned out to be fake.
So is this entirely your own party's decision and initiative, or was this kind of a case where your party was kind of looking for the next section of track that your DM was putting down?
Yes, we were looking for the next story beat. This was also a very like actually railroaded campaign, because this was one of the campaigns where the DM had described all the lore from the Stone Age to the Space Age,
right?
And like ultra railroaded to the point where he would stop us from doing stuff if it would break the canon of the show.
Unacceptable then.
Yeah, but so I still have like mixed feelings about it. Mixed feelings of like, it's kind of cool because it was the first time I like really kind of felt the implications of like, yeah, false rumors can really cause somebody to like die in the wilderness. I just kind of wish that the stakes were like less severe. And it did set up other good moments, but I do feel that it was bad because once we got to this point, I felt like we didn't really get anything from it. We didn't accomplish anything. We weren't given anything in return for our efforts. It's not like we found a weapon. It's not like we got extra experience. It's not like the next clue on the path was revealed to us. It's like, all right, we got to the end of our journey. It was a failure. Time to go home. That was the feeling that it had.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of examples in movies and shows where the protagonists run down a rabbit hole, but they always stumble upon something that aids them later, even if it's not immediately relevant. Like, you should introduce a sage who will teach them some cool spell, or you know, they hear rumors of these relics who can help them slay the bosses or something like that, or like it it's not it's I think it's okay to kind of have the party fail at their true purpose, because it kind of creates a sense of like managing their expectations of an adventure, and what kind of story they're being told. But they should never ever have nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing with that example.
Yeah, there needs to be something in return for the efforts, because if there was nothing that they got as a result, there's no point.
I mean, even if they get like a cool new item, it's still, they're going to be like, oh, this is the cool item I got on that stupid adventure.
Yeah. Also, these people are coming here every week because they want to hang out with you. They want to see you. They want to see like what you have going on. You don't want to mess with their fun, mess with their expectations, and kind of leave a sour thing in their mouth. They're coming to you for
their
like
free time, their leisure time.
Yeah, and it's like you're kind of saying that like you're willing to waste their time in game.
I think the other thing is, it's easy in those examples to say, like, if you had like stumbled upon some other lead, that's too coincidental. That's not realistic. But one of the biggest epiphanies I had as a DM was that the players have to be the exception, not the rule.
Mm-hmm.
They like let them be like excellent, let them excel, let them be like let them thrive in places that nobody would or should. That's because they're adventurers, they're heroes, they're not the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
They should be.
Yeah, these are the jackasses on the edge of the world, picking apart the scales of like a 10,000-year-old dragon looking for some like sacred arrowhead.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, right. You aren't going to find it. You're looking over like hundreds of miles of mountains. It's like, it's the same kind of thing with The Hobbit. It's like how Frodo was able to find the hole in the mountain, like the keyhole to open up, to get into the mountain.
He meant Bilbo, guys.
Oh, whatever.
Don't kill him.
Who cares? They're the same character.
How dare you?
Actually, no, I take that back. Bilbo was a much better character than Frodo.
Oh my god. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm gonna.
Yeah, he's gonna go get the belt to like belt me. Lastly, within the umbrella of not giving players agency, not using the rule of cool.
Mm-hmm.
There have been plenty of times when I've had players who like die in some horrible way or the other, and sometimes like they go out swinging, other times they don't do the thing. And I would just say like, within the possibility of the world, you should let your players have cool moments, even if they're outside the realm of outside the realm of the rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a player is just wants to go run someone down, and like they know that they're going to get away, but the tension at the table is like really, really high, and like this is what everybody at the table wants, that they want them to like jump on this guy. It's like, yeah, go ahead, just like give them an extra movement action, let them do this, let them do that. If they're dying, they failed their last save, like have them like be stumbling around and come up and just like let loose with like 50 attacks in one turn. It's like let them be spectacular.
Yeah, I think I stumbled upon the rule of cool because when I started DMing, I would like sometimes struggle to keep describing how the combat was carrying on, and so I tended to kind of just let it lapse after a couple rounds. But before I realized that my players have these things like loaded. They have descriptions that they want to like let out into the add to the narrative of the combat, and so it's like, yeah, let them go for it. Let them, whatever they describe is the rule of cool. Let them describe whatever they want to describe, and describe their characters doing.
Yeah, I'll even change damage based on how cool their description is of like what they're doing. Of like, yeah, maybe they aren't very dexterous, but they are describing how intricately that they tie a pebble around a stone to like drop through bars so that they can have poison drip down the thread into some stew that these guards are eating so that they can put them to sleep and then walk past. It's like, yeah, that's just an awesome character moment that I'd love for you to have. Let's like make that happen, and let's you fuck what the dice say. Let's let your creativity shine.
Mm-hmm.
And now kind of the inverse, giving players too much freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you, in the inverse of railroading and writing a story, not a scenario, you have to have a balance of what you like need for your scenarios to keep playing out, and what am I trying to say here? Take the implications of the world seriously. Like in the notes we have, it says roll to convince a king to give away his kingdom. Unless you're laying down some serious enchantment magic, that's not going to happen.
Unless you're doing it the right way of pretending to be a prince from another kingdom who's offering an alliance through the marriage of his daughter. Like, I wrote that example, and then I kind of realized, like, if you just roll and you're just rolling continuously, it doesn't make sense, right? Mm-hmm. If you're like actually looking at historical precedents and also thinking like, maybe I can extort this king because he's got like a dragon or something going on, and maybe if I get rid of that dragon, I can like get lordship and eventually do something, whatever. But I kind of realized like how that example, like depending upon the stuff going around, that isn't.
I think the spirit of it is just like, don't let a dice roll decide something that shouldn't be possible.
I think that's it, but I also think it goes further in you shouldn't compromise the implications of the genre, tone, and setting to allow for
total and unfettered player freedom.
Yeah. Like I had a player who in the same session, she did two things. One, there was like a giant monster she was trying to run up to, and so she wanted to run up this taut rope to get at the monster, just run across a tightrope. It's like, totally, that's cool. Later that she was like climbing up to a wall and wanted to fire a ballista down at the monster, and she then wanted to ride the ballista bolt like a surfboard down onto the thing. And I was like, you could try, but the thing will misfire and probably break your leg. And, you might lose balance and then fall like 150 feet off this wall.
Mm-hmm. So,
like, let's hope you get a 20 and only break your leg.
Yeah.
So that was like one thing.
I'm trying to think. I don't know if I have any really spicy examples for that one.
Giving players too much freedom.
Yeah. I think even in the beginning, some of my players said that I always did a good job of balancing that, freedom versus realism.
Yeah.
Like we kind of just covered the second one, which is taking the implications of the world seriously. I think that was kind of a...
Yeah, I think that one's like a pretty cut and dry kind of point. I don't think that there's much to talk about.
Yeah.
I think you get that. Mechanical bloat.
Well, yeah. So, mechanical bloat, adding too much to a system or an encounter. I think my brain just broke.
You added too much to your brain, and you just like what you're
Mechanical
thinking.
broke. There was that tomb encounter. I think the general consensus on the player part. You guys said it was it was probably on the cusp of mechanism bloat.
Yeah. So
there were a bunch of runes. They're fighting a witch, and there were a bunch of runes dangling from the ceiling, and there were a bunch of different effects. And so it was kind of a thing where if the players didn't want to engage with it, it didn't mean anything, except one of the colors was a trap, meaning if you stepped underneath the color, it would do something to you. But otherwise, you could just straight up fight the witch. I thought it'd be a fun thing to see if players wanted to, connect the dots, because then there were other ones where if they broke this one, it would heal them. Broke this one, it would give them spell slots back. Mm-hmm. And the witch was also using those.
Mm-hmm. I think part of my apprehension, to go on a tangent and kind of break that down, mm-hmm. I think my apprehension was the first one that we broke was a trap, like the very first one. And
it put you guys on edge for the
immediately, yeah, because it's like, okay, this is dealing damage. Why would there be beneficial and negative things in this room? Mm-hmm. And like there's like 6 or 7 different colors. So this just feel of colors of runes in the ceiling. So this just kind of feels like it's meant to be confusing. And it's like, so it's meant to like kind of deceive. And that was like the interpretation that I got, which, wasn't necessarily true to your intention, but none of those mechanics, were kind of like built up previously. And then we would have to basically experiment in the middle. We would have to experiment with essentially 5 different mechanics, or however many there were.
I think there was 6 or 7, because there's the 6 colors.
Yeah.
And then maybe white or black was another one.
Yeah, so we would have to basically experiment with 6 or 7 different mechanics while the floor was raising with like this black smoke of death. We were fighting off Draugr, and this witch was hurling spells. Mm-hmm. And so unless...
Well, there's another thing. The smoke and the Draugr could also be controlled or managed with the runes. So if you broke runes... I had to keep heavy notes on this to be like, all right, these 2 Draugr are being kept alive by this rune. Mm-hmm. And this cloud of smoke mm-hmm. is going to keep billowing until this one's broken. Mm-hmm. I in the moment, I did think, like, because you guys tripped the trap one first, there was no way you were going to interact with the healing one in a way that was going to help you decipher its, like, mm-hmm. its effect.
Yeah, it was just like, bottom line, it was just too much. It was too much, and it was too much in the heat of battle as mm-hmm. well. Like, if we had been going through the campaign and we knew for a fact that different colors correspond to like different schools of magic, so that we could guess at the... Then again, this was also like my first or second session, that we could guess at like what each one did and have like an understanding of like, okay, the red one is bad, the green one is good, the yellow one is going to do something that's indirect, kind of deal. Like, if we had that understanding like from the get-go, might have been a little bit more willing to actually interact with these things. But you know. But I think that it's just a really good example of what can happen when you just have too much going on. For me, I feel like when I've DM'd, I have not too much mechanics, but I feel that I have too many different types of monsters fighting, right? And so my kind of philosophy of how I manage and make monsters has changed, where originally I was making monsters to have all like these different sorts of attacks and like have like a unique cast of monsters and multiple monsters that were fighting. I kind of realized that the only thing that really matters is how strong they are, how big they are, how they move, and how hard they hit, you know? And it's like, aside from those like couple of things, I don't really need to know much else of like what's going on. I just need to know like generalizations of like, what is the archetype that this monster falls into? And that helps me keep track, because running in 5th edition, running monsters who have spell options is just a nightmare, right? So I just don't even look at what the spells say, like what they say in the book. I'll just basically have them cast whatever spell I need them to cast, but also whatever spell feels thematic. Like if I want an AoE that's going to kind of restrict things, and these are like spider things, even if they don't necessarily have the spell web, I'll just let them cast web. If I want something that's like, because I mean, a lot of the spells in D&D are really kind of all the same. Like it's just different damage types, but like the different damage types don't really matter, especially not against players. It matters a lot more for players attacking monsters, but not really monsters attacking players. It's like, I don't know when the last time I encountered a player who had resistance to force damage, you know, aside from a wizard casting shield or like a barbarian raging or something. You know, it's not really something that they try to build.
I think this kind of approaches a similar concept, which is don't let rules get in the way of your fun.
Yeah.
Like in my table, we look up the rule after the fact if it's really that important.
Yeah.
But in the moment, do what the DM says.
Yeah.
So like if you have a question about how Fireball works, the DM's going to make a call. If you want to cast Fireball next round, you do the research, but don't hold up the combat to look it up for this round. You know, if you didn't have that prepared, then you got to go with the ruling and then do it correctly in the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get caught up on the need for mechanical consistency, and I do agree. Like, you know, mechanical consistency is an important feature of the table, but it shouldn't be the end all be all of every single encounter. And you should be flexible enough to be like, okay, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen right now, but we aren't gonna take 10 minutes to slow down what we're doing to figure out what the exact thing in the book says to do. Like there's a reason that they tell not players, the viewers who go to like the live Critical Role sessions to not shout out how rules work.
Right.
It's because it just slows down the play, and you aren't really there to, you know, be part of the rules. You're there to be part of the fiction and like experience the challenge. And it's like, yeah, rules can influence challenge, but at the same time, like, so much gets changed up on the fly, and we're playing with dice. The nature of the game is so random that like you kind of really need to be okay with that level of flexibility.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like when you're making an encounter, you want it to be dynamic, and I think where all of these wires we're talking about here get crossed is that mechanics are the mechanism to create a dynamic encounter, but mechanics do not translate directly into a dynamic encounter. Like just adding mechanics for the sake of it, it just makes it cluttered, not dynamic.
Yeah, you really do need to look at mechanics and think about why you're adding certain things and why certain things need to exist. Like, is this a purpose? Does this exist for the purpose of achieving genre and tone? Does this achieve something that I want to happen mechanically? Like, do I want to overcome some sort of player defense, or do I want the player to overcome a challenge? And kind of really understanding why those different mechanics exist and how they contribute to the nature of play.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, inversely, mechanical inconsistency.
Right. I think I'm guilty of this one. I need to focus up a little bit more when I design campaigns. I like to do a session 0, and I like to do because I like to say I like to test stuff. So right off the bat, that leads to a lot of inconsistency in my campaigns, because I'll be like, oh, this wasn't working, we'll just toss it. And in my like session 0 questionnaires, sometimes I put in like, well, what do you guys think of this mechanic, or like, should we try this one out and stuff. And so what that kind of ends up being is my players who want to try out some stuff, they end up saying yes to a lot of it. A lot of it doesn't work out, or I start to or I'm trying to remember too many of these things, and they start dropping one by one. So I think me personally, I have to test less and be consistent more. Pick some things that I like and are helping me drive home the genre I'm trying to achieve, which is really my goal for a lot of these tests. And stick with them for the course of the campaign.
Yeah, totally. I'm trying to think if there's an example that I can give as well. I don't think I have a problem with being mechanically inconsistent personally. I think my problem definitely is more mechanical bloat than mechanical inconsistency. Mainly because I really like to just gamify every single aspect of play. I like there to like be something going on that kind of like makes sense, that plays into the nature of the game world, not just one thing, not just the other. And that kind of also brings us into too many dice rolls.
Yeah. I was definitely the kind of DM in the beginning who just thought that, this is the game. You're supposed to roll dice.
Mm-hmm.
And once I just kind of let that go, I started having a lot more fun as a DM, to be like, and not even cases where it's like, oh, you can't convince the king to give up this kingdom. Not even talking about that. I'm talking about cases where I'm like, oh, that's cool, I want this to happen. Like if there's like an instance where you don't want if a result on the die would be undesirable to everybody at the table, not even considering if it's possible within the fiction, if nobody wants a certain result to happen, why do that?
Yeah, why even roll the die?
Yeah, you can. I mean, the example exception being, I do this all the time. I still roll a die behind the DM screen to make it look like there was a chance for it to fail, but no, I want the thing to happen.
So what you're saying is you're emotionally abusive.
What I'm saying is that I'm a liar.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, I kind of look at dice rolls. They're fun. They are a very fun part of the game that kind of like is the player thrusting their will into the game world. But at the same time, needless dice rolls really slow down the game and really make it unnecessary for what's going on,
Yeah. Like I said in the beginning, I always lean towards rolling dice, but now I in creating characters, I always have my players do standard array or point buy, because I always thought that have players roll dice anytime we can is the best way to play D&D. But I did have some instances of players like, oh, this guy rolled too well on his stats, it's not fair, or like this player they rolled really low stats but they don't know better, kind of thing. I think it does a lot to balance the game to not immediately jump to dice rolls in a lot of instances.
Yeah, I mean, I look at like in the game itself, right? I kind of look at dice rolls like, I think picking a lock is the classic example, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I have a lock box, I think, and let's say I am back at camp, I think only two results matter. Either I open that thing there, or I can't open it at all, right? It doesn't, because if what is the point? So let's say I'm just like sitting there trying to open this box and the DM's like making me roll, right? What is the point of rolling the dice roll to make the sleight of hand check or what the use tools check? What is the point of doing it till I succeed? There is no point. It's just a time sink to like see what happens, right? And so the only time that dice rolls matter is when there's a time pressure. Dice rolls, aside from that, don't really matter at all, right? Maybe they do, like if you're using like a third party supplement for crafting, or you're trying to do something else for like very specific reasons, but I really feel that there's not really any reason to like just throw in extra dice rolls for the sake of extra dice rolls. Like just eliminate them where you can. The game goes faster, like in role play too, right? If the player is able to come up with a interesting explanation, an interesting dialogue that feels like it really engages the world, and it demonstrates that they have a mastery and understanding of like the different desires and structure of characters within the game world, it's like, hell yeah, reward them. Reward them with the success or whatever that makes sense for that moment in the fiction, So it's just like,
yeah, it gets you the rule of cool much easier. The cool option.
Yeah, maybe that's what the rule of cool is, just avoiding dice rolls in a way,
What was our next point?
Is being obtuse or undescriptive. So
this one was interesting to me because I think I do this because I try to I always trying to figure out how to apply a genre. So I tend to keep I try to be a little ominous and keep some mystique. But I think the way that I do that is by providing information in short, concise sentences. I don't think I necessarily leave out, but I think I hope that I'm inviting people to look more.
Yeah. So the reason that I put this one down was this came to my mind like months ago when I was talking to a friend of mine named Matt, who is a newer DM, and he was asking me some advice on how to like craft descriptions. And he was a little bit uncertain on like how to put a description together, in a way that felt like interesting and fun. So how would I explain what I'm trying to say here? He was trying to ask me like how to, like, what is the correct level of description or like amount of like verbal content that you need to give somebody to allow them to know what they need to do. And he's a writer, so the example that I gave him was the English language is a very specific language. And there are a lot of words within the English language. And but the only real reason that you use more like descriptive language is because you're trying to narrow the focus of what you mean and be hyper specific. You can go and you can write a story and you can have a thesaurus open and like pull words into your story and just use big words for the sake of using big words, but it isn't demonstrating an actual mastery of language itself. All you're doing is haphazardly throwing around large terms. And so it's much more important to accurately describe what the players are encountering than being illustrative and trying to formulate a sense of feeling. Because you never want your players to be in a situation where it's like, I don't know what to do. The only thing I know is that like there's a table and like some chairs, and I don't really know how to like encounter this, right? And that's like a scenario that I never want to be in. So for that reason, I feel like it's better to overshare than to undershare, because you never put your players into analysis paralysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big deal.
How do you think that relates to sort of burying the lead, right? Like if you walk into a room and into the next room of a dungeon, and the only thing that there might be a couple things in the room, but the only thing that you describe is like a bookshelf, right? The players are going to go over to the bookshelf and start pulling books to try to find the secret lever, right? So where do you think, how do you think you would find that balance, you know, burying the lead that the secret door is behind the bookshelf, but, you know, adequately describing the rest of the room?
Well, I think you first need to look at the pattern of behavior, right? Are you presenting them with enough information so that they feel confident in what they're doing, and looking around at their faces and like what they're saying, like what is their overall feelings, right? Do they look like they are upset? Do they look frustrated? And so, of course, you never want to say that, you know, there's like some kind of secret button like under a desk or something that like flips open a hatch, but at the same time you want them to be able to investigate stuff. And you know, players will only investigate what you tell them. It may not be like the quote unquote right thing or what you want them to investigate, but they can only react to what you give them. And if you give them nothing, they can't do anything, right?
Right.
So there's a couple of principles, like theater principles, Chekhov's gun, of like, if you're going to describe it, it has to have purpose. It can't just be a throwaway line that means nothing. I mean, there are times to use red herrings to subvert expectations,
Mm-hmm.
but not to the point where stuff gets fuzzy and gets annoying. I've played in a fair number of mystery campaigns, and I gotta say, red herrings are actually incredibly annoying because they just slow down play, and they don't really you don't really feel good, because you just kind of feel like you were stumped and you don't feel like you figured it out. And like, you know, we're D&D players. We aren't like Sherlock Holmes. We're stupid. We're big stupid.
Right. I think I'm trying to remember the details of Glass Onion.
Mm-hmm.
Spoilers alert.
Great movie. Check it out. It's a lot of fun.
There are a lot of instances where they use red herrings, but each of them kind of builds into the final reveal towards the end. Like I'm trying to think.
I feel like those red herrings are honestly more gaslighting than red herrings, you know? It's
Yeah.
like it's not necessarily a false lead, like it is real, but it's like within
Well, I think they are technically false leads, but they still provide context to a greater picture.
Yeah.
That helps the final reveal make sense. Like the example I'm trying to think of was Dave Bautista's character was always trying to get on a main news channel, and like he eventually, this is where the spoilers come, he eventually blackmails what was the guy's name, Braun, the inventor, whoever the actual culprit was. I forget the actor's name. He was like a big guy to big connections guy who can make that news deal happen. And so you're made to believe that that's Dave Bautista's motive for murder. And then from the spoiler, when Dave Bautista dies, it turns out is because he tried to use it to blackmail Braun, and it turned out to not be related to any of the motives for the murders, but it helped to paint the picture of the actual relationship of all of these friends, right? None of these friends were actually, supporting each other. They were all in it for their own self-gain and stuff. So it helped paint a larger picture. It was definitely a red herring, in my opinion, but provided more context.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I said that there were two kind of theatrical elements that I wanted to describe. Mm-hmm. One was Chekhov's gun. Everything that you put has to have relevance. And then number two was using senses other than sight to describe what's going on. As you walk into the tavern, your boots stick to the floor with the gallons of spilled ale. Mm-hmm. As you pick up the Peach apartment, it's so aged and dry that it leaches the oils from your skin. You are assaulted by the rancid stench of the sewage as you descend the manhole.
And the greatest example, Spy Kids 4D Smell-O-Vision.
Oh my god! Oh my god! I remember that.
I don't know why that just came into my head.
Was it Spy Kids 3 or was it Spy Kids 4?
It was Spy Kids 4 because it was Spy Kids 4D, the fourth dimension being smell.
But I thought they
let that sink in.
Was that with like the new kids? Because they had like a guy that they went after, like the master at the time.
I think it was still at least the brother was still in it. Because 1 was Floop, 2 was Dinosaur Island, and 3 was
the video game world.
Was the video game with Frodo in it.
And what was 4?
Smell-O-Vision. I don't remember the details of it. I never saw it.
That. Didn't you have to like get that thing at like Burger King? Like in order to get the Smell-O-Vision, the scratch off, you had to go. I remember that. There were a couple movies like that. It was either that or like the Rugrats movie where you had to go to like Burger King or McDonald's and get the special toy that had the smell scratch off.
I remember that one.
And then the images would appear in the corner. And I remember going to the movie and hearing like 50 kids scratch and then just all simultaneously. Like 50 kids. It was the funniest. Oh man, I remember I was so jealous. I was like, I don't have the scratch off. I don't know what it smells
so
like.
Weird.
But honestly, it probably would have all just smelled the same as like cheap plastic.
Once you've got 3 or 4 of those puppies scratched off, I'm sure they all just
like blend together.
I don't know.
Oh man, that's so funny.
Sorry, that's just where my brain went.
No, it's fine. I bet those scratch offs exist on
eBay somewhere.
Yeah, dude. You know what I want them to do? I want them to do that for the new Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh my god.
could you imagine if there's a company that does that? Like, because there has to be a company that like
They must be
manufactures them.
struggling.
Well, isn't it just like smell stickers, right? So couldn't you just like go to a company and be like, I want smelly stickers, I want these scents, and then you could just have that correspond to the movie. That feels like it would be a really funny. Like, imagine watching The Room with one of those.
Oh my god.
It's like it's like you smell the leather of the football.
No.
The champagne smell.
So much no.
What's his face's underwear when he comes back in to grab it from the mom.
No.
That's awesome. I want that. I want that so bad. That is so funny.
I don't think that The Room smell-o-vision is something that we should ever. It's not a question of can we, it's a question of should we, Joe.
Yeah, you don't want to smell gunpowder at the end of the scene.
No, that's what I was thinking of. The final one is very irony,
very spicy,
smell,
a bit sulfur, yeah.
Where were we at? I'm totally lost.
I
now.
know we totally.
Repetitive combat. I think that's the next one.
That's a great way.
I think this one is something that every dungeon master is guilty of in their first couple sessions.
I wouldn't say guilty as much as like a victim of. So,
I think we in a conversation we had maybe on a previous episode or just outside in general, we talk about the greenest battle and how that kind of becomes a slog. Because the players are level 1, they have to go through so many encounters, and half of them, according to the book, are just supposed to be just absolute brawls with cultists in the middle of the street.
Cultists and lizard dogs.
Lizard dogs.
A dinosaur is just a lizard dog.
Stop.
I was thinking about dinosaur barbecue just now.
Oh God, yes.
But yeah, so repetitive combat. D&D, so let's just say put all of the extra supplements aside, and we are just looking at the DMG, the player's handbook, and the monster manual. Right off the bat, monster manual is entirely about combat.
Mm-hmm.
So monster manual, that 1/3 of the 3 books published are about combat. Player's handbook, character options, the overwhelming vast majority of character options,
Just how the player engages with combat.
how the player engages with combat.
And regardless of whatever else is in the player's handbook, that's just the most used section.
Yeah, the class features weapons and armor. You never touch backgrounds after looking at it once.
Mm-hmm.
And then equipment and spell sheets.
Also combat.
Yeah, both of those also combat. Like the trinkets section doesn't really matter for anything.
It doesn't do a lot to help you make your encounters dynamic, like we were saying.
Yeah, and then DMG, the only thing in the DMG, I've consulted a handful of the tables here and there for like running a business or like how adventure in the wilderness should be examined, but honestly, it doesn't do anything. And then the other thing that's in there is just the rewards for the combat, the treasure section. And it's like literally like 60 to 70 of the core 3 rule books are just about defining combat. And you would think 70% of the rules are about defining combat. It's got to be some really intricate, interesting combat. But no, all it really does is explain like what a monster, the math behind a monster, the math that a player can produce, and then the rewards that those players get for basically doing the math. And I was sitting on part of the reason why I don't like virtual tabletops is because I've had experiences with DMs who, like, to their credit, were like a little bit novice, didn't really know how to make interesting combats. So a lot of their combats really boiled down to roll the dice. I hit, I do damage, DM rolls, hits, does damage, and then literally just a back and forth between players and the monster without really having any sort of real need to think about positioning or without really needing to think about positioning or how to maneuver or gaining advantages or how to minimize your pain or trying to deal with environmental effects, because the aside from like difficult terrain and fire, the DMG doesn't like list out anything. Like it literally just lists out those two things, and it's like every single encounter really kind of boils down to punching something in a parking lot.
Yeah, I think I as a DM had to develop my own rules for creating encounters to make them more dynamic, and I think step one for me is they should all someone in the encounter should always have Sauron's mace. Remember at the start of Fellowship of the Ring, he joins the Battle of the Last Alliance and just starts throwing people across the map with swings, like 6 or 7 people at a time per swing.
Yeah.
And the purpose of that is to just make the players use the field more, make sure combat doesn't just get locked down into a single corner of combat. I remember there was one campaign that I was in, and we kind of had a large party, so I think this to a degree couldn't be helped, but I was playing a barbarian, and the party was also front loaded with a ton of melee combatants. And I rolled really low on my initiative, and halfway through the combat, I'm like, and this was against one large boss enemy. I was like, halfway through the combat, I was standing there rolling arrow shots for my barbarian attacks. I'm like, I'm a barbarian. I'm not in someone's face right now. What am I doing? Because like all of our melee guys were literally plugging every single open slot around the boss. I couldn't get anywhere close to him, and he wasn't disrupting them at all to like let the boss move. The boss was literally incapable of moving for most of the combat.
Oh, dog, 1 inch of 1 inch.
Yeah.
This is basic Warhammer rules.
I know. No melee for me.
Yeah, no pile-in actions.
I wish.
That's also kind of why I've gone gridless in a lot of ways, because I don't really care about what the grid has to say for how we kind of arrange everybody on the field, because there will be times when it's like, okay, we're in a corridor. The map doesn't really allow us to stand side by side, but like, I'm not a 5 foot wide dude. There should be two. This should allow comfortably for 2 people using the types of weapons that we're using to stand side by side going down this corridor, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I go gridless. It's like a lot less thing that you need to like mentally think about when you're like kind of in there and you're like moving shit around. And that's also why I like Tailspire as a VTT. 1, because it's so visually stimulating, and 2, because like I have so much more like freedom in how the players move their characters. Getting back to more like the notion of repetitive combat, I feel that a lot of DMs don't really think about the other sorts of things that they can do during combat to like make it more interesting. Runehammer Games, Hankrin Fernale, has what I think is the best video. Every single dungeon master who's getting into tabletop gaming should watch that video. It is the video that taught me how to DM. I think it is his magnum opus of D&D content, and like he really set out so much clarity, with so much clarity, set out just fantastic principles that I aspire to emulate.
Yeah.
Awesome,
Video.
awesome content, the best, the best. And in his video, he kind of
Link in the description.
yeah, hell yeah, absolutely. He kind of breaks down combats into three kind of categories of damage, duration, and disruption. Damage being obvious, duration being like the length of the encounter, of like the classic like water rising from the rising in, and disruption being your Sauron example of the mace knocking people around and other sorts. It's like your environmental effects slash space disrupting effects that manipulate, that force people to have to move, and like kind of dialing each of those. And you know, we can have our own kind of conversation about challenge tuning, but honestly mine's going to be so informed by like what he does or what he says. I'll have to think about how to like talk about that without just copying and pasting everything he says, because what he says is just genius. Once I realized that those are different sorts of avenues that you can kind of manipulate and turn, it really kind of opened my brain to the possibilities of DMing. And that is exactly the kind of stuff that should have been in a DMG, that should have been talked about. You know, it shouldn't. And that's why I say, like, you know, DMs are victims of 5th edition.
Yeah.
And like just because it doesn't give them the tools beyond just a game of adding and subtracting, you know?
Right. Yeah, it is a very good video. I think he's never mind.
He's a lumpy head. He's got,
what does that mean?
It means, well, I mean, first of all, that's what he calls his viewers. He calls them all lumpy heads. And he definitely has like bits of his brain poking out. If you can't see it, it's like it's poking out into the ether.
Yeah.
And so another thing, I don't know that we said, more hit points does not equal more fun. I don't know if that we actually said that out loud.
Oh yeah.
But I think the popularity of the minion rule from 4th edition is a prime example about how less hit points actually equals more fun. It's like total inverse. The only amount of hit points that in the game that matter are 1 hit point, 2 hit points, or many hit points. Those are the only thing that matter. Can I kill it in 1 swing, 2 swings, or many swings? Those are the only things that matter. And honestly, your enemy should really I feel that enemies should really only have like one of those 3: 1 hit, 2 hit, or multiple hits. 1 hit for weak monsters, 2 hits for something that's a little bit more difficult that you want to potentially sink more attacks into, and 3rd being your boss monster. And your boss monster should, maybe it has hit points, maybe it doesn't. I don't really think a boss monster should necessarily have like a hard and fast hit points, like maximum, because you'll be surprised how fast, like in 5th edition, players can start to do 50 damage a turn.
Right.
Very fast. Like sometimes by level 3 or level 4, they can do like 50 damage in a turn. And that is like significant.
I think a lot of video games like kind of do this, and this is where DMs get the cue to like just rank up the hit points.
Yeah, just bigger numbers.
A lot of video games do this to varying degrees of success. Like Halo games have a difficulty modifier function called skulls, and one of the skulls does increase the hit points and how durable enemies are, how tough their shields are, but you always have and Halo Reach, you always have. I guess assassination has always been a thing. You always have assassinations and headshots to deal with them. So in those games, in Halo, it's kind of successful because it just changes the rules of engagement. But there are other games that just like, oh, we need to create a new difficulty. What can we do? Oh, just slap a 0 on the end of those hit points and call it a day. I think that's unsuccessful, and it's given DMs a bad cue to just do that with their games too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy. It's easy and it's tempting, but it just makes stuff be more of a slog. Half the amount of hit point, like I always say, like whenever I'm in a video game and like I'm fighting stuff, I'm always like, I just want all of these things to have half the amount of HP and double the amount of enemies on the screen, always. And like I think people should do that for D&D as well. It's like, sure, you're messing with the action economy and whatever, then just make stuff easier to kill, whatever. It'll work itself out. Don't worry about it. It's like it'll all work itself out.
Yeah. I think we have both admitted at one point or another to not actually tracking hit points on our boss monsters.
Yeah.
And just being like, oh, well, I think the combat should wrap up soon, so whoever hits it next kills it.
Yeah, or going on with the, I think there are times to be very mechanically and meticulous in your number crunching and like doing certain things. If the numbers and the math affect the decisions that your players are going to make down the line, then they should be tracked. If the numbers are irrelevant to the thing, like if a monster has like staged health, like they get different actions or different abilities at different health thresholds, or for the Hydra example I said like an episode or so ago, where the thing regrows ahead once it gets more than 24 hit points of damage. That is a decision. That's an interesting and flavorful decision that the players have to make to manipulate, to change their strategy, to adapt. If there's no real difference between a monster having 50 hit points and 60 hit points, it's like, who cares, I think it's more important to look at how many rounds should this encounter last instead of how many hit points should this thing have.
Right.
And like, some players are probably like, their brains are like splitting in half, being like, my damage doesn't matter. You said that you needed to respect the autonomy and agency of the players, and if the damage doesn't matter, what's the point? And it's like, why are you playing a tabletop game, buddy?
Yeah.
Go play a war game.
Yeah, what's gonna be more satisfying, like one-shotting the final boss, or like having the epic back and forth of will they succeed? Doesn't look like it, but there's just scratching back, and they beat him in the 11th hour. Right.
Yeah.
You want to have that struggle. It makes the result more satisfying.
Yeah,
or
totally.
The illusion of the struggle.
Well, maybe. I do think that I kind of go back and forth on that.
Yeah.
It's like, I do agree that there should be like very defined rules, and that there shouldn't be. There should be defined rules, but then open enough for people to like do it. But I also acknowledge that there's only 3 health pools in the game.
Right.
1, 2, or many.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I never want to do something that's going to take away my player's satisfaction with the encounter. So doing something like not actually tracking hit points can be helpful sometimes, but it's a very precarious illusion because if you ever let your players find out, it's not a good feeling.
Kind of.
Maybe like years later, but
I feel
a couple days is like that's kind of like, oh, whatever.
I don't know. I kind of feel like I kind of do feel that even when I do a lot of damage, or when I do, it's even though I might know how the DM is tracking health or whatever, I can know that doing that high. And also, I'm not saying, I don't think either of us are saying like do the damage every single time. Like when you were running that giant encounter, you were still tracking the amount of damage, individual points of damage I was doing to this monster. But at the same time, you know, you had an idea of how long this thing should go. I think that there should be a health pool. Like there should be a numerical value attached to a boss monster.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you know, the ending like 20 to 30 health plus or minus should fluctuate, you know? And I think like why does rolling high on damage matter, right? I think that it should give like it's really just there to feel satisfying that I have done something to influence the game world in a great way. But really, it's like, you know, players are guilty of this all the time, where it's like a player at 1 hit point is the exact same as a player at full hit points. You're just as dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of like visualizing it like that, it's like, what does it matter if the monster does a lot of damage to you, because you're still like, if you don't go down during the combat, right? And I think like players understand that from their perspective, but like they should also understand, maybe they should also understand it, and DM should understand it, that it also works from their perspective as well. Mm-hmm. It's just that their health is much more sacred than, and shouldn't be like kind of up in the air as much as like monster health should be, because ultimately you're doing it for them. Like, you know, this experience is for them to have fun.
Right. I think it does, like, maybe that part of it does kind of come down to DM philosophies, because I have a philosophy, a similar philosophy about movies. If you're totally enraptured in a movie and you're loving it, you're sitting on the edge of your seat for the whole thing, and you're like, this is awesome, and you're thoroughly enjoying it. The movie ends, credits roll, you walk out of the theater, and if you sit down in your car and you think, wait a minute, that made no sense whatsoever, in my opinion, it's too late. You already enjoyed the movie. You know, it's like it did what it set out to do. It enraptured you, and it unraveled you in its fiction. However you feel about it after the fact, you just spent an hour and a half loving a movie.
Star Wars Episode 9.
I never even saw it.
We should watch it one day.
No. I mean, you say that, but Star Wars Episode 8 is kind of where I put that into words, because in the first 10 minutes of this movie, I was like, this is so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I'm about to get so much hate.
Who knows?
Yeah. Don't come at me for that.
Yeah, I don't know. I gotta be honest, dude. I don't know that I've ever met someone who's like a actual fan of 8 and 9. Maybe 7.
People who are fans of 8. I was a fan of 7.
Yeah, that's why I say 8 and 9, because I know you like 7.
I know people who liked 8. But anyway.
I don't know. I feel like I can always get caught up in the moment of like what's going on, but I need to like come down from the emotional high of just a good like flashing lights. Like, dude, it's like it just needs to be dumb. I'm like such an idiot when it comes to like the kind of media I like. But
it's about like immersing you in the moment, in the scene, in the fiction, and like that's what we're talking about with this you know, encounter design. You
Yeah.
know, is if whatever illusions you throw up, if they work in the moment, if it means your players had fun at your table,
Yeah,
I think it
totally.
worked.
Sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, deal with the consequences after.
Yeah.
Speaking of consequences, unclear goals and unclear rewards.
Yeah, I think this is like the third time I said I think and then I just took a long pause.
And then it left your brain.
I know I'm thinking of something. It's just putting it. That's not translating into words. I've tried to run sandboxes, but like I said, my players, they kind of look for the railroad tracks. So like,
Yeah.
I think you need to kind of set out the goal. In that example, I was overstimulating them. They were waiting for the one thread that they should pull on instead of all of these bunch of threads. So it saying have clear goals and clear rewards. I think it's important to gauge the wants and expectations of your players on that account, because they might want all of the options to choose from. They might just want the main thread. I do remember there's another Colville video where he talks about reward structures, and he I forget how I think this was like a recommendation for a type of play, but he like gave out this structure. He said you should start giving this to your players. It's just a note card with the quest goal that they're on and the reward. And the reward is very clearly like it could be like the 10,000 gold bounty that you were promised for going on this adventure, or it could be like this magic sword. You have no idea how that's going to come up, but like, you know, your player says like, "Oh, I want a magic sword," so he'll go after the quest. It's about some players want that crunchiness of being able to work on their build or something like that. So it's really relevant and related to what your players want and expect from a campaign, I think.
Yeah, totally. I ran a West March, and the thing with a West March is that each session is supposed to be scheduled by the players, and the thing kind of fell apart because, sure, players got busy and did whatever, anything, but a lot of them were looking to me to be like, "Hey, when's the next session?" And I'm just like, it's up to you guys. You this is a living, breathing world for you guys to like go through. And it's like none of the players in that game had ever encountered a West March before, so they were really in the mindset of like, I'm here to do this, right? Like I'm here to play, show up, play, roll dice, role play, go home, and we'll see each other maybe next week or whenever. But a lot of them just weren't really prepared for what a West March asks of a player, I feel. So that was like, kind of not necessarily like related to the topic of goals and rewards, but kind of related to the topic like tangentially of what you're saying about how like goals and rewards provide structure, and without that kind of structure, there's not really a desire to continue playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like what are your players looking to get out of the game? How are you structuring your game so that your players can get that thing? Too much adherence to world lore.
That one, kind of already talked about that earlier in this episode. The DM that literally had proto Stone Age to Space Age tracked out, defined on a line, and would stop us from making plot holes from killing essential NPCs. And what that really just means is you should let your players influence the world. if you aren't letting the players influence the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on here, buddy?
I mean, this can cause a lot of problems for a game. I had a DM who liked writing world lore, and I think he eventually started using it as a procrastination tool. So we started asking like, oh, when's the next session, DM? He was like, oh, I'm just creating a map of the city of this or that, and they're like, oh, the city of this or that. Is that where we're going next? And he's like, oh no, this is on the other side of the planet from you guys. It's like, okay, why are you doing that then? He's like, I don't know. Like you gotta prep. We're building world lore is fun, but you have to make sure that you are delivering for the game.
What is the point of building world lore that your players will never encounter?
Exactly.
It's like, sure, it's fun. It's a great exercise. It's great creative fun, but like, do that on your own time, not during the prep. If you want to write a book, go write a book, dummy.
Exactly.
Don't use other people's time to like throw that around.
We had like 2 or 3 campaigns fall apart because that next session never came after a point.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah. The next is the duality of outcome, failure and success. And I think DMs, I feel, only plan for success, and failure means TPK. I feel like most DMs kind of don't really think like, what does failure in this quest look like, and what does that kind of look like going forward, right? So when I have a TPK or a situation where there would be a TPK, I kind of like circumvent that by saying like, yeah, you're all captured, stripped naked, in a cage. Name of the game, Prison Break. Right, so it's like they need to get their stuff back, they need to escape, they need to get out of here, and I make it as like a thing, or maybe like the classic, The Hobbit. The dwarves get captured by the trolls. That is a narrative TPK, and instead of all of them just being eaten and dead, the rogue and the wizard figure out a way to basically make the trolls argue until sunrise. That's an excellent, that kind of example of looking at Bilbo and Gandalf in that situation is a great way to kind of figure out how you should circumvent a TPK. There should definitely be consequences, and I'm not saying like avoid a TPK when it's appropriate, not when there should be one. You know what I mean? Like, if the players feel good about the TPK, like it's the end of a campaign, we're fighting to like stop the Lich Lord from raising an army of undead dragons, and we failed. Now we've ushered in 1,000 years of darkness, and now the next campaign is taking place in the doomed world of undead dragons, like roaming the place. Right. That is an awesome plot point. That's awesome world building, awesome history, and so on, right? But that might not be the energy that the players want to do, especially if like the players get their asses beat by like 30 coal volts and slightly elevated wheat. That was a joke to a thing about like these kobolds that just absolutely decimated a party of level 4s who were like, they couldn't see the kobolds and the wheat, and they just like threw rocks at them until they were just like stoned to death. And there's something like 30 of them in the wheat. I wasn't playing in this one. This was my friends. thing. And that was a TPK, but it was a good joke because they were like slightly elevated wheat. Like, what a stupid phrase that is. You know, you can't see them. It's like, okay, buddy, whatever. Sure.
Yeah, I think this kind of speaks back to encounter design too, where if your success and fail states are just winner TPK, that definitely says that you're not making dynamic encounters. Like,
Yeah.
you have to add that spin in where you're like, oh, there's like a prisoner, so we like suddenly the fail state is the prisoner alive or dead at the end of combat? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Because that prisoner could end up being like, the baron of some kingdom, and now that kingdom's going to fall into chaos, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and having a variety of outcomes of like good and bad outcomes, and not just having stuff that is set. Like, yeah, you survived the goblin attack, but you guys were so vicious and brutal, like in the traps that you set and the tactics that you use, that you have like garnered this reputation of just being brutal. And now the local orc chieftain is like, that sounds like a worthy challenge, and you called in. But at the same time, like, the local priests, they don't want to condone your just viciousness, So thinking about like the ramifications and the implications of like what the end of combat means and going forward and all. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you just got to have a dynamic encounters lead to dynamic
results.
Dynamic results, yeah. Not even being as binary as success or fail.
Yeah. As we said before, like, don't say yes, don't say no. Say yes and no and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there was that's not even really related to only really related to what you just said there. There's like someone once told me, when you're giving players lore, you should never answer their question. You should never give them an answer. You should give them a question with their answer in it, right? So like the result being answering any question a player has about the lore is going to give them 2 more questions about the lore. Mm-hmm. In it, while still answering that first question. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big key part of yes and no and.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good list of blunders, and I think we have some exceptions in there too.
Yeah, exceptions and anecdotes, and a pretty dynamic episode, I'd say, with a lot of different outcomes.
All right then.
All right. Well,
get out of here.
Have a good night. It's St. Patrick's Day. We are gonna get thrashed and have some fun. Be safe.
Yeah, be safe, y'all.